everyone. This is Karen Brosnahan, Managing Director of HR Services. On behalf of Jim McSweeney and all of us here at the CIP Group, welcome. Our topic today is the Mass Equal Pay Act, and we're very happy to have Dave Wilson back as our presenter. Dave is founding partner of Hirsch Roberts Weinstein, a preeminent employment law firm in Boston. Some quick notes. There is a checklist that has been prepared by Dave and is available to everyone in the handout section. And we are also recording our webinar today. It will be posted on the CIP Group website, askcip.com. And also, if you have questions during the webinar, please enter it in the question pane located on the right side of your screen. We'll try to answer as many as we can in the time allowed. But thank you so much for joining us today, and I will hand things off to Dave.
Thank you, Karen. We're here to talk about the Mass Pay Equity Law, and this law is a new law. It's been passed, but it actually goes into effect on July 1st of 2018. And what's important about that is, and the whole idea behind the law is it's designed to strengthen the state's existing pay laws and propose certain new obligations and limitations on employers. And the goal of today, if we go to our agenda, is understand what the new pay equity law is. We'll talk about what is considered comparable work, because it's supposed to be equal pay for comparable work. Then there are 6 justifications for having pay be different for comparable work. Then there are other unlawful practices such as salary history, and we'll test Karen Brosnahan's thespian skills during that. We'll have a little role play and let you folks make some calls. And then finally, now that you understand this, what should you do next? And we'll talk about that. So let's get right to it. So first off, under the law, and the law that goes in effect is Chapter 149, Section 105, capital A. And it says there's 2 things that you can't do. The statute prohibits discriminating against somebody based on their gender, or having a gender pay disparity for comparable work. And when we say male versus female, you could have a situation where actually the women are being paid more, but in Massachusetts, about the women on average earn 87 cents for every dollar a man earns. So in most cases, we're probably looking at situations where the women are being underpaid. All right, so what is comparable work? The new law defines comparable work as any work that requires substantially similar skill, effort, responsibility, and is performed under similar working conditions. Now, a job title or job description standing alone does not determine what work is comparable. So thus, even if a male employee and a female employee have different job titles, if those jobs are comparable as defined by the new law, one can't receive lesser wages than the other. So right off the bat, let's look at a situation. So you've got the person on the left, they're a janitor, and they're making $14 an hour. The female on the right is a cleaning lady, and she's making $12 an hour. Are they performing the same job? And there's already been some discussion on this point, and the answer is yeah. What's their job? Their job is to clean. Now, there are some arguments perhaps that the janitor maybe has to do some more heavy lifting, but the bottom line is they're both assigned to keep a building or an area clean. And so this came up with respect to hotels, where janitors were being paid more than the cleaning people, and usually it was the cleaning women, and that was found to be comparable work, and that the pay should be comparable. So think about your own company, and are we making some of those old biased assumptions that based on the job title, that the man is maybe being paid more than the woman, but in reality, they really have comparable jobs. Now, this janitor could be paid more than the cleaning woman if there are certain categories we can take into account. So, for example, there's 6 permissible justifications for pay disparities. One is a seniority system. So, if I've been there longer, I may have higher pay. And, I think you want to think about that. So when, as a janitor, if I have 10 years experience and you have 1, maybe there should be a disparity. But how about if I have 30 years of experience and you have 25? Really at some point, and I would say after 10 years, that seniority maybe shouldn't matter as much anymore when it comes to actually the experience on the job. But seniority can mean a lot of different things. In some situations, seniority is years on the job, but in other situations, it might be things like when you're a lawyer, for example, we pay, and I was at a big firm, and everybody was on a slot scale. So first year associates made X, second year associates made X plus $2,000. Third year associates made X plus $4,000. Fourth year associates made X plus $6,000. So there was lockstep based on seniority, and then people might receive a bonus based on other factors, such as the quality and quantity of work or how good they were. So that's the second one. We've got merit system. So you look at that. Now, the thing that's tricky about a merit system is it turns out that I'm a very tough supervisor, so I will give on a 1 to 5 scale. Most of my people, I just have them at 3 meets expectations. Karen, as you know, being the warm person she is, thinks everybody's doing a great job, and she would score her team, and most of them are getting 4s and 5s. So is that then a fair merit system where it turns out that all Karen's folks are then being paid more under that system because I'm just a tougher grader? Then you've got systems that measure earnings by quantity or quality of production or sales. And that's easy in a sales role where often people are paid a commission based on percentage of sales. But it can be a little more complicated than that. For example, I have a client that sells a product, and in New York City, they need 3 salespeople to sell this product because there's such a demand for it. But out in the Midwest, they'll have 1 person covering 10 states. So the size of the territory and the goals to be met, are different in sales, and so you can't just do straight numbers on those. So there are also 3 other types. So we've got geographic location of a job. For example, pay might lawfully differentiate for comparable work where one employee works in, say, Mobile, Alabama, where the cost of living is relatively low, and Boston, Mass, where the cost of living is relatively high. Sometimes geographic location can be also related to simply where they are in a city versus out in the country. So those factors have to be considered. Education, training, and experience that is reasonably related to the job performed. So somebody may have a PhD in philosophy, but if it's an engineering job, should that really count? Arguably no. And then finally you have travel. And travel really consists, I think you break travel into about 4 different categories. So first is travel from home to work, commuting. And you know what? Everybody generally has to do that, but unless they have a work from home. And generally, commuting time is not considered compensable time, and it's not reimbursable. But what if and I'd say the next level of travel up from that is I have to come to work, and then I'm sent off-site to visit different clients or customers or make certain visits during the workday, and it's in my car. But I still get to sleep in my own bed at night. Then the next level would be maybe I'm traveling in my car, but I'm also staying, it's far enough away where I'm not going to be able to sleep in my own bed at night. And then finally you have travel that's overnight, but also, maybe where you're getting on a plane. And so that seems like a higher level of responsibility and travel. And then finally, you've got jobs where 50% of the job might be travel compared to somebody who doesn't. And so the law recognizes that in those situations, you could have pay differentials based on the travel. Okay, so the law also lays out some additional unlawful practices. So it makes it easier for employees to discuss their wages by making it unlawful for an employer to prohibit employees from disclosing wage information, to retaliate against employees who complain about pay disparities. Now, the one exception is that employers may prohibit human resources employees, supervisors, or other employees whose job responsibilities require or allow access to other employees' compensation information from disclosing that information without prior written consent from the employee, unless it's a public record. So, for example, under state law. The law also prohibits an employer from asking job applicants about salary history or seeking such information from an applicant's current or former employer. And what's the theory behind this? Well, the theory is that if you do your hiring based on somebody's salary history, and currently in Massachusetts, a female's making 87 cents on the dollar for every male, then we would just be perpetuating that salary discrimination. And so that's the theory behind it. It also really forces employers to think about what's this job really worth and what's the range that we want to pay in based on experience. So I think that's the key factor in the theory behind this law. Now, it's unlawful to require an applicant to list their salary history on an application form. So if you folks have that on your forms now, you need to get it off. If a prospective employee voluntarily discloses their prior wage or salary information, a prospective employer may confirm it. And a prospective employer may seek to confirm salary wage history after an offer of employment with compensation has been made or negotiated. So that's all after the fact. So some of this is new and some of these changes aren't. For example, under the National Labor Relations Act, employers were always prohibited from penalizing employees for talking about their wages. All right. So let's talk about the pay information and these transparency provisions. So for example, I cannot seek wage. You cannot seek wage or salary information from the applicants. The salary history can only be voluntarily provided. You can't call up the previous employer and say, Dave used to work at your company. What did you pay him? You can confirm a prospective employee's wage or salary history after an offer of employment's been made, though, with compensation made with the compensation, and that's been negotiated and made. So, for example, I tell you the job is 50 grand. We negotiate back and forth. We end up at 52. At that point, I can confirm, your salary history after that. Now, asking somebody about their desired or expected salary is likely okay. And we're waiting to hear from the Attorney General's office on this. Although the statute specifically says at the end that the Attorney General may issue regulations interpreting and applying this section, we've been in touch with the AG's office, and we think it's unlikely that they are going to do so. I think they're going to wait to see how this law shakes out a little bit. There's been a push to try to get them to maybe just issue some type of guidelines for smaller businesses, as many large businesses are going to attack this anyway. But at this point, they've shown no signs of that they are going to issue any types of regulations. Now, our caveat about talking about salary and salary history is that it could lead to disparate compensation for comparable jobs. So if you're not doing it, asking for it, then you're not likely to fall into the trap of dealing with that. So, and I would say the last two bullet points on this slide illustrate that it's difficult for employers to try to get around these requirements. So, for example, while asking an applicant about expected or desired salary, a desired salary is likely permitted at the moment, we think. Basing salary on such information could lead to unlawful and disparate compensation for comparable jobs. So you may not want to pursue that. So what are some of the implications of the salary history changes? Well, you want to revise your employment applications if they seek salary information. And you want to train your interviewees not to seek salary information. All right, well, let's, what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into some scripts, and want to give people a chance, some examples so you can see. So I call Karen Brosnahan in for an interview, and here we go. Karen, we're so glad you could come in for another interview. I know we've had you in a few times, and thank you so much for your patience. We think you'd be a great fit, and we're hoping to extend an offer to someone soon.
Great. I'm still very interested.
Do you have any final questions for me?
What does the position pay?
Well, we're still actually working on that. Now that you ask, what is your current salary?
Well, I'm currently making $50,000 a year.
I think that's about where we're going to wind up for the salary for this position. Okay, and so the question there is was that permissible discussion by me? And the answer is no, because I made an inquiry. I said, what is your current salary? And Karen, being the honest person who wanted the job, she certainly did that. So now that you understand, we're going to do by show of hands if you think something is permissible or not. And those of you that know how to raise your hand on it. So let's go to Script number 2. Karen, we're so glad you could come in for another interview. I know we've had you in a few times, and thank you so much for your patience. We think you'd be a great fit, and we're hoping to extend an offer to someone soon.
Oh, that's great. I'm still very interested.
Do you have any final questions for me, Karen?
What does the position pay?
Well, we're still working on that. Actually, now that you ask, what is your salary expectation?
Well, I'm currently making $50,000 a year, but I think my skills and experience warrant a higher salary. I'm hoping to make $60,000 per year.
I think that's about where we're going to wind up for this, for the salary for this position. Okay, by show of hands, how many people think that that was permissible? Let's see. Okay, most people think that is permissible. And you would be correct, right? So I only asked about salary expectation. Now, there's no guidelines or regulations that have come about that. So I didn't ask for salary history, but we just asked what she was hoping to make. Okay, and so that we think is going to be considered permissible. All right, let's go to the next script. Script number 3. Take it away, Karen.
Okay, we really want you for this position at nonprofit company. I know you have a good job now at for-profit company, but we think we would be a great employer for you.
Karen, listen, I think nonprofit company is great and that I would thrive here. I'm just a little worried about leaving my current job at for-profit because it pays so well.
Look, I understand that this would be a pay cut for you. We really want you, and we would do whatever we could within reason to make it as painless as possible. What are you making now?
Okay, so show of hands if you think that was a permissible inquiry. Okay, and a few people thought that was okay. But in fact, that would not be permissible because what are you making now is basically the same as asking me what is my salary, what is my salary history. So under the new pay equity law, that would not be permissible. Okay, let's go to script number 4. Karen, thanks for coming in again. We'd like to offer you the position.
Well, that's great. What does it pay?
It pays between $50,000 and $60,000. The question is, where on that scale you would fall based on your experience? What are you currently making?
I'm currently making $52,000 per year.
Well, Karen, I think that's too low for you. We'll offer you $55,000 for this job. Okay. Let's have folks click on that one. If you think that was permissible, raise your hand. Okay. And that would not be permissible. Again, even though we said what the range we were paying, we asked her what she was making. So, okay, let's go to script number 5. I'm sorry, on 4, we said, what are you currently making? Now, 5's a little bit different. Karen, thanks for coming in again. We'd like to offer you the position.
Great. What does it pay?
It pays between 50 and 60. The question is where on that scale you would fall based on your experience. I think 52 is fair. Is that okay with you?
I think that's too low.
Well, Karen, you are a very tough negotiator. Well, we'll offer you 55 then. By the way, what are you currently making? Now, raise your hand if you think that was permissible. All right. We've got a very educated crowd here. Yeah, that is permissible because I'd made the offer, I'd made the salary offer and there'd been actually some negotiation. I'd made her the offer of 55, and then I made the inquiry. So again, I think what's the message here for, or what are the implications of these types of situations? Well, I think that that first, employers should revise their policies to prohibit employees from discussing, inquiring, or disclosing wage information. So if it says that in your policy that your employees can't talk about their pay, then you need to get that out of there. You also may want to look at your trade secret and confidentiality to make sure that if it's talking about disclosure of their own salaries, that is not in there. Now, HR folks can be prohibited from talking about the salaries of others. And finally, you can't discipline people for talking about their wages. But what this suggests is that for employers that you may want to think about when you post a job is listing the salary ranges. So if it's a job that you're going to pay between 50 and 60 based on experience, or maybe you don't want to list an upper limit, you say this job will pay at least $50,000 based on, and possibly more based on experience. And that way you don't get somebody coming in, you interview them, you like them, and then afterwards they tell you that, you know, they thought this job was $100,000, your job, when it's only 50, and you feel like you've wasted all that time. So, but ideally, this will help prevent the perpetuation of discrimination in pay. Okay, so now we sort of covered the basics of the law, and I want you to think about planning for, let's talk about some next steps. So now you're planning for your 2018 salary budget. And here is a handy little document. So if you look at your total payroll, and I recommend you do this sort of first to kind of get your arms around how much of an issue you may have. So here's an Excel spreadsheet. I've got the total payroll. I've got the total female payroll. And this includes all their W-2 wages. Then we've got what's the gender-based wage differential? Well, in Massachusetts, the average company, it's 87 cents on the dollar, so I put in 87%. So in this case, if the females make up $1 million worth of our payroll, then 13% is the gap we need to close. So that translates to $130,000 or 6.5% of the payroll. Now, under the law, they can, an employee can recover up to 3 years of damages and then double damages in the form of what they call liquidated damages, which means it just doubles the amount. So the total exposure for this company in this situation would be $780,000 if they didn't close this gap. So, you know, one of the first things you want to try to do is get your arms around this issue. And I can, let's see, I've got, if I can do this, let me find I've got, all right, so here's the live version of this document. So let's say that, you know, I don't have as bad a pay equity problem as you think I do. In fact, I think that women are making 98 cents for every dollar the men are making. Now, look how the damages change on $1 million in revenue. The wage gap is really only 20 grand, and it's only 1% of payroll. And if we get a lawsuit, it looks like our total exposure is only 120,000. But so this is what you want to kind of get an early feel for what your potential exposure might be and how much time you need to spend on this. But let's say that you're pay gap is like 78 cents on the dollar. Now you're looking at some real money here. The wage gap is 220,000, but look at with the damages and the total exposure, you're looking at 1.3 million, or over half the percentage of your annual payroll. So the point of doing this is just to give you a feel for how much exposure you may have. Now, let's say that your company is predominantly men, and the females only make up $100,000 of the payroll of the 2 million. Then you're only looking at a relatively small number, 132,000 instead of 1.3 million. But let's say that they make up 1.5 of the 2 million. And now all of a sudden you are looking at a much bigger exposure, almost $2 million in potential damages. So the reason I'm showing you this is to give you need to get an idea of what your potential exposure may be. And if you're trying to get the attention of the CEO and the CFO and those in the C-suite, then running a formula like this will go a long way to getting people's attention. All right, so let's go back to our PowerPoint here. There we go. Okay. Display. All right, here we go. So what are, we've described the problem now. What are the next steps that you should be taking if you haven't already started? Well, first, you should set a timetable for analyzing and implementing a plan based on the July 1st effective date of the law. And the reason that I think you may want to run that little Excel spreadsheet formula is because if your budget is on the calendar year, your fiscal budget is on the calendar year, you may need to account for some extra budgeting to close those gaps between now and bake that into your 2018 budget. So second is review the hiring documents to remove pre-employment inquiries regarding compensation. Think about adding salary ranges to job postings and job descriptions. So in other words, if you're a company where if I've been there for 35 years, you just raised my, you gave me a 3% raise every year, or every year that you gave raises, I may be an outlier in a job category where everybody else is making 50 to 60,000, but I'm making $87,000 because I've just been there so long. So you want to be careful about situations like that. So we recommend that you create salary ranges and for each job and job posting, and that you cap out a salary in that job category. All right. Next, and I think we talked about this a little bit, but you want to train all your interviewers on the legal and illegal pre-employment inquiries regarding compensation. Basically, they cannot ask about salary history until after they've made an offer, and that they have, in that offer, made an offer of the salary amount. Then, as a company, you want to make a decision about how transparent you want to be with your employees. To the credit of the head of Salesforce, he said he didn't think he had a pay equity problem at Salesforce, but he had his, and if he did, he was going to correct it. So he had his folks run an analysis, and they determined that they needed to add $3 million in their payroll to close the gap between what men were paid versus what women were paid. And to the credit of the CEO, they did exactly that. So, but they, in the course of that time, they added $3 million extra to their payroll. You want to go through your company policies, handbooks, employment agreements, non-compete documents, and take out anything that talks about you're prohibited from sharing compensation information. Again, you want to train your managers and supervisors on pay transparency so they don't discipline people for discussing it, and also that they're aware when they're going through and recommending pay raises and pay information, that they're not doing it in a gender biased way. Again, I think the other step is, after you run what you think the possible exposure could be, is you want to go through all the positions in your company by job title, put them in groups and categories within the organization. And one document that might be helpful for you is if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website under job categories, and I include in the slide the place to go, the IP address. It will give you potential disparities in the jobs. Now, at this point, when you're doing this, we encourage you to get your lawyer involved and have all this this analysis protected under the attorney-client privilege. Next, you want to look at become familiar with the 6 permissible factors under the law, and make sure that you are comfortable that everything here, that you understand it. So when it talks about a system that rewards seniority with the employer, provided, however, that the time spent on leave due to a pregnancy related condition or protected parental, family, or medical leave doesn't reduce somebody's seniority. 2, when you look at a merit system, what is your merit system fair, and what does it look like? 3, a system that measures earnings by quantity or quality of production, sales, or revenue. Again, you have to factor in things, though, that some people may be set up to succeed based on their sales territory more so than others. Number 4, the geographic location in which the job is performed, and the cost of living sometimes in those areas, or the fact that somebody has to travel to perform their job. 5, the education, training, or experience to the extent those factors are reasonably related to the particular job in question. So, I could have a PhD in philosophy, but that's not going to necessarily make me a better ditch digger. And so, is it reasonably related to the job or not? And then 6, travel, if travel is a regular and necessary condition of the job. So, me going to one conference a year is not really going to be considered traveling, even if it's work related. And then finally, we want to evaluate the pay variations against these 6 factors. So what I recommend you do is that you pull together an Excel spreadsheet, and you have the names and the W-2 compensation of each employee. And I don't think that we need to include the health insurance, even though you pay for that, that doesn't necessarily mean that's something that employees have access to, and they can choose to pick it or not. So the fact that, employee A is on the family plan, employee B is on the +1 plan, employee C is just insuring themselves, and employee D is getting it through their spouse, even though those employees are taking different amounts of money from us as the employer, that's not really W-2 compensation. That's just about access to a benefit, as opposed to actually having the benefit, choosing to take it or not. So the only time I think you count that is if if, as the employer, you say, look, if you go on your spouse's health plan, we'll pay you an extra $2,000. Well, that's W-2 income, and you would want to include that. So, so the first thing I think you want to do is you want to put an Excel spreadsheet out there with the names of the employees and their pay and their job titles, and try to group them into job categories and look to see, just eyeballing based on the job categories, if how folks are being paid, and based on gender. And you can sort of eyeball that. And once you get over 30 employees in a job category, you're probably in the range where you want to use standard deviations and run a regression analysis. So regression analysis starts to work when the numbers are big enough, and really 30 or more, statistically, that makes sense. And then once you've done your analysis, you want to develop a plan to remedy any kind of disparities disclosed by your evaluation. And that could include revising job titles and descriptions, moving people to different departments based on the comparable effort, responsibility, and skill, and make sure you put in a budget for any of these compensation adjustments. Now, as I said before, if you have 30 or more employees in the same job category, at that point, I think you're going to want to probably bring in a consultant and look statistically. Well, first you could just look at their pay and see if they're all within a relatively small range, then it may not be an issue. But if you have disparity in the range, you may be in a position where you want to run a regression analysis to try to determine, what factors are controlling that. So that's the end of the formal part of my presentation. Karen and I wanted to leave time for questions that folks may have. And if you see, there's a place where you can type in questions, and be happy to try to address those. Now we have a handout. I actually there is a handout that's sort of a checklist of next steps for you to consider, and so that should get you started. And the main thing here is I think you want to get started. So the first thing you probably want to do is get the compensation and job title and names and gender of all the folks in your company. Try to break them out by department and or job position, I should say, because you may have the same type of job position in two different departments. And then look to see if there are any anomalies out there that that you need to deal with. So, okay, it looks like we have a question. Will you email the presentation? Yes. Yeah, we'll send a PDF out of it. Absolutely. Other questions? Oh, here we go. Let's see. The law starts on July 1st, 2018. So these are suggestions till that date. Well, that's a great question. I would say this. I would start trying to comply with the law now. I mean, I think that it makes sense to do all this now. And that's because if you're targeted and somebody files suit against you, you want to show that you didn't wait until July 1st, but you started implementing and complying with the law, even though it hasn't fully gone into effect. That would be my thought on that. Okay. How do you handle disparities in pay when comparing one employee who lives in the U.S. to one who lives in another country? Great question. Well, I think that the law accounts for that in that it talks about that one of the 6 factors you can consider is the geographic location in which a job is performed. So, for example, the pay scale in England may be different than the pay scale here, or the pay scale in London may be higher or lower than that in New York. So I think that is a permissible factor to consider under the law. Great question. Next question. Is the analysis a good tool even if there are no gender issues, just differences within a position? I think it's a good analysis to make, and you want to make sure that people are being paid fairly regardless of their gender. So using these factors would be considered a good approach for an employer to take. Okay. Can I keep my employment? I'm not sure what that question was. Can I keep my employment? Can I keep my employment application that asks for salary information since I only use it after the offer has been made and accepted? We send them to our background check company. Yeah, if you can certainly ask that question after the offer has been made and accepted, and and we've told them what their salary will be. Absolutely. Good question. All right. Any other questions?
Dave, I was, this is Karen. I was wondering if when we talk about policies and handbooks, and we're going to remove policies that prohibit employees from talking with each other about their pay, is there a way, though, to channel communication back to the employer to say, if you have a question about your pay, please see the Human Resource Office, or speak with your manager, rather than
sure,
kind of a group discussion going on in the lunchroom?
Right. No, absolutely. We could. I think that's a great idea to say in the policy that if you have questions, who they should speak to, and that certainly would not be prohibited. What's prohibited is saying that if you discuss your compensation with other employees, you'll be subject to discipline up to including termination. That kind of language needs to come out. Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
Okay, let me just see if we have any other questions. I think that's it. If folks have other questions offline, happy to share that. I'm also happy to share the Excel document where you can calculate what your potential issue may be. And I think the hardest thing on that is to know what percentage you're off by. If it's 99% between males and females, it's not hard. But if that number falls to 79%, then in terms of liability and the like, it could be substantial, the amount that you could owe. I think it's a good tool for getting you started and thinking about what are we talking about in terms of dollars here, and how seriously we need to take it. So I'll share that with Karen, and then I think if you send your evaluation, and she'll share that with you. So
sure will. Well, Dave, thank you so much. Another very informative webinar, and it's always a pleasure to have you back with us.
Well, it was my pleasure, and it's great working with CIP and all their clients.
Super. I think that'll be the end of today's presentation, then. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.